So we're trying to figure out, are we central to the universe? Is man central to the universe? Was the universe designed so that man could exist? And what's mind-boggling is the amount of the sheer random luck that would have to happen if that were true. So we look at the stars and physics and look at the way the universe is, and there's very specific things. We're going to show a little video clip here which will maybe explain it a little bit better, but the odds of us just existing in terms of distance from the sun and gravitational pull and amount of nitrogen and oxygen and humidity and moisture content, stuff like that, is just mind-boggling. And so what we figured out, this is Stephen Hawking. He says the laws of science as we know them at present contain many fundamental numbers like the size of the electric charge, the electron, the ratio of the masses of proton and electron. The remarkable fact is that these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible development of life. And that's all life, especially intelligent life. And this is some of the example of that, but on the bottom we're talking about these knobs, and these knobs represent maybe the constants of the universe, and they would have to be, they're very specific. They have to be, they're on the scale of about 1 to a billion ratio for each one. They're that specific that if they were off by 1 billionth, that life just couldn't exist. So we're just reviewing the first lesson here. So then they talk about, well, let's talk about the multiverse. This is a theory that the physicists and scientists have come up with, and it says there's an infinite number of different universes, and there's each one has, these dials are just kind of randomly set to different ones, and it's infinite, so that means everything that can exist does exist. So everything, so every combination of those dials exists because it's an infinite series of universes. So we just happen to be in the universe where all those dials happen to be set up for life to exist. They use the example of the movie Avatar. In Avatar, the plant life of the planet was joined together, and when people would die, they would kind of absorb into the plant life, and the plant life had kind of a neural network, and it was kind of a big brain that ended up being the entire planet, every bit of plant life on the entire planet. And the analogy they make is, well, take that even a step further, and it's not just that planet, but all planets in our universe, and that might be and those kind of connections where everything's connected, and there's one force where everything, and one being where he can kind of control everything, control all the planets, control all the physics, control every atom. Then all of a sudden, maybe that's a physical explanation of what God is.
And I think his point, and Insenberger's point, wasn't necessarily that there is a multiverse for sure. He was just saying that there's two different theories. One is this idea of the multiverse, but whenever you look at that, you come back to God existing, because if everything exists, then God exists. The other is just looking purely at physics. When you look at the fine-tuning of the universe, which is kind of the realm where I like to camp out. But whenever you look at the fine-tuning of the universe, and we'll show, like I said, or like Craig said, a little 5-minute video clip that goes through some of the specific things, like our location in the solar system and the gravity, the electromagnetic spectrum, just different things that have to be exactly so for us to exist. Whenever you look at that, they're so precise that as well points to God. So either realm that you kind of camp in, you end up at this same conclusion of God existing, which is the first question in the series is, does God exist? And then we'll look at macroevolution versus creationism. And then the next thing that we'll look at is, well, is the Bible accurate? Is it? Can we trust what it says? And we'll look at the Old Testament and the New Testament, how that's been passed along. And then after that, we'll start looking at some of the specific biblical stories and things like that. So it's kind of a journey, I guess, if you will, that we're going on.
So if we want to summarize the first lesson in terms of one sentence, we'd probably say, well, the options in terms of explaining it are that these dials are so specific that somebody had to be fiddling with the dials and setting them all, so that's God. Or there have to be an infinite number of universes, and we just happen to be in the one where all those knobs worked out right. This is Richard Dawkins. He is an atheist, and he's very outspoken in terms of being an atheist. He is of the firm belief, and he's very anti-God and very strong in his beliefs, but he still talks about the fact that these knobs are so specific that there has to have been something. There have to have been somebody, somewhere that set those knobs. And he does conclude that there's kind of a godlike being of some sort. He doesn't say that it is God, because that would go against his atheist beliefs, but he does admit to the fact that there's godlike beings, and then he backpedals and says, well, that God probably came about through evolution too. So.
I love this little DVD. If anybody ever wants to borrow it and watch the whole thing, you're more than welcome to. But that kind of summarizes it. And so the idea is that regardless of whether we came to be through a process of macroevolution, which I'm totally okay with that I don't think that takes away from God at all, or instantaneous creation, over 15.75 billion years, or 6,000 years, wherever you happen to camp out in that spectrum, there's obviously something very special about Earth and where we are, and the fact that so many factors came together, either guided by the hand of God or instantaneously put there by the hand of God, whichever one you choose to look at, for us to be here. Because when you look at the factors, when you look at the probability, even compared to the number of galaxies, the number of stars, whenever you look at that, the numbers are literally statistically impossible that they randomly happen, which to me is very reassuring. That's a neat thing. Compliments. And I've gone through different places in life. Early on, I went through the normal, Sunday school approach to everything and, life. And then I hit college, and my degree's in engineering. And all of a sudden, I felt like science was just attacking my faith, and like they didn't coexist together. And I really kind of went through a faith struggle there. And then once I got past that, the more that I studied it, the more that I learned about science, once I got past the surface level, it began to really complement my faith. And so that's kind of our hope. Yes?
Well, one of the things you have to also realize is so much of science is still actually theoretical.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in a
learning
way,
process.
a lot of the scientists are really philosophers. They're just sitting there thinking, how could this happen? How could this possibly? And all of a sudden, that's science. And you're like, wait, that's not
Where
really
did that come from?
what I would call science. That's philosophy. That's an opinion of a pretty smart guy, but it's an opinion.
One of the things we discussed is that just like Einstein, God reveals to specific men at specific times exactly what we can handle.
Yeah,
That's true.
That's
Just
true.
as far as we're going to let
That's
you go
true.
right now.
Because you can
Further
imagine
down
God
the
coming
road.
to the caveman and
That's
saying,
right.
okay, here's a particle accelerator, you're going to build this, you're going to build this. And he'd be like,
Super cool.
exactly.
Which is
That's a
exactly,
really good point.
you've mentioned that. It's exactly when we talk about macroevolution and creation. And I said verses earlier. I didn't really mean verses because, in my opinion, I think they really go together beautifully. But because they show the same order of events in the same the same events in the same order. But one of the questions that Anselm Brewer really brings up is, if you were God, how would you explain this to Moses? And you're right, there's so many things that in biblical days they were really intelligent, but they hadn't come as far as we have, as far as technology and knowledge of the universe and things like that. So you do kind of have to think back, okay, how would you explain this in a way that they would understand it?
Yeah.
And so
And God had to be the perfect teacher. He had to put it in terms that they could understand. And that's why you have so many parables. Jesus has so many parables and says, well, I'm going to tell you this little story about this happened and this is what happened. But it teaches this broader principle because you can't say, well, I'm going to approach this like it's in 2020 and you understand all the scientific stuff and all this
Well,
philosophy
we have
stuff.
more historical data nowadays
Right.
than
Right.
they did
Right.
2,000 years ago.
And
Oh, yeah,
information is
absolutely.
traveling.
Yes.
And we share all the information so quickly now. So, do you consider the earth to be fine-tuned? Why or why not?
Extremely.
Extremely
I
fine-tuned.
mean, the conditions are so
It's mind-boggling.
specific.
It's
that-
mind-boggling, yeah.
it is. You know, another thing that we have to think of, though, is that these are the conditions for life as we know it,
Right.
carbon-based life
Right.
to sustain.
Right.
You know, that opens up the
A
idea
little,
of
a little flexibility.
of other types of life
Right.
forms. I mean, we know life as carbon-based life.
Right.
There's
And-
been
and
a
in-
theoretical aspect of silicone-based life.
Right, in Star Trek, I always
You know.
remember they were off on this silicone base.
So, you know, but that, we just have to always keep that in mind. This is life as we understand it.
Exactly. And they allude to that in the thing, it might be in this lesson today, that, you know, you've got all these mind-boggling numbers, and I was going to create the number, because within Stone Brewer, he says 1 in a billion for each of these 26 constants. That number is just mind-boggling. You can't even fathom what that looks like. And then he talks about how, well, that's only life as we know it, so the odds are probably slightly better than that. You know, probably maybe let's say 1,000,000 times better than that. That's
Right.
still nowhere near. It's
Well,
still
even-
mind-bogglingly small number. So,
Even though, with the, you know, the theory of the multiverse, well, that means, if that's true, then you have different dimensions, infinitely, you know, an infinite number of dimensions, not ours, but still the possibility of life could exist in those dimensions.
right, and maybe those lives are silicon-based
Right,
stuff. Those
exactly.
other kind of lives. Yeah, absolutely. Do you think a multiverse is possible? Why or why not? I have a hard time wrapping my mind around that personally, but
He said yes, I said no. My mind is way simpler.
So you only hear is more dimensional stuff, that's all.
but going back to our caveman thing, you know, if you were a caveman, could you fathom all the stuff we know about today? You know, I remember watching Star Trek at The Next Generation about 15 years ago, and they said, well, okay, we're going to go down the planet, and I need to answer this question. You know, Captain Jean-Luc Picard said to Data, he said, I want you to answer this question. He takes out this little thing out of his pocket, and he's like, oh, let me look that up, and then, oh, it's this. And I was like, no way, that'll never happen. You can't have all the knowledge of the world in a tiny little device. Guess what? Now we have it.
Yeah.
So, you know.
I'm still believing for the beat me up.
That's me too. Me too.
Yeah, so who knows? Even though I can't wrap my mind around it.
But with God, anything is possible.
Absolutely. Why do you think people may assume they must choose God or science instead of assuming that they can complement science? And
Pride
mix
and
them?
ego.
Ego?
And I think that boils down to this idea that we have to understand how this was
Right.
done. You know, and we don't. It's like the viewing of God. God, you can't look at God because it would kill you because it's too vast. It's
too much for us to handle.
And I think that knowledge, the true knowledge of the universe is the exact same way. It's too much for us to handle and to deal with.
Yeah, just like, too much, information, It's like the motion picture, Star Trek, the motion picture, it showed a scene of Mr. Spock was trying to gather information about this alien or whatever that their Enterprise was inside, and he nearly got overwhelmed himself,
Even though his brain kind of is on a whole other level than a human brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder too, and this, if maybe, I mean, this is just my opinion. Please disagree with me by all means. You won't hurt my opinion at all. But I wonder if in many times both Christians and people who would oppose Christianity, if we're both guilty of adding to this God or science, and not all Christians and not all people who would oppose Christianity either, but if we don't sort of add to it in that we go, you have to be in this realm or this realm, and you end up almost raising a generation who thinks it's either or, that it's one or the other, and that there's somehow this thank you so much. I couldn't think of the word. This clash going on that maybe doesn't really exist, and maybe even if we wanted to take it to a little bit deeper level, or I hope I'm not over spiritualizing here, but that maybe that is kind of a tool of the enemy, in that in that the more that we learn, we go, God can't exist. We're over here and they're over there. But in reality, it's just showing us a bigger picture. It's kind of like, most of y'all have probably seen the Powers of 10 video, haven't you? Maybe. If not, okay, we need to show that. We'll show that maybe next week. But it's cool. It shows a little picture. It's very short. It's cool. You can Google it. But it takes an object that's very simple and then it multiplies it by the powers of 10, so on and so forth. It's lots of science teachers show it. But you end up with something totally different than you can imagine. Just based upon your perspective, just based upon how much it's magnified or how far out you are. And I think in many ways we do that with God and science. We get a little picture, and for whatever reason, personal agenda or personal mindset, I know that I've gone through a good, 15 years of my life or so, where I said, God and evolution can't be in the same realm. No way. They're against each other. Can't possibly be in the same boat until I started studying Stone Brewer's stuff for totally different reasons. I went through a divorce, and that's kind of what got me into his stuff. But whenever I started reading it, I went, wow, okay, this guy was on the translating team of the New Living Translation of the Bible. He kind of knows his stuff better than I do, and he's okay with them coexisting. And then the more that I learned, I went, maybe there's not this big clash. Maybe it's not. So do y'all think that maybe as Christians, I'm sorry, that was a long dissertation. Craig's here to keep me on track. To ding the bell and go be quiet.
It's an interesting point, though, that even we as Christians make the same mistake, where we say, well, there's two parts of my life. There's the God part, and there's the science part where I'm doing all my stuff and driving my car and getting my brakes checked and getting new tires and getting an oil change. But they don't. We need to be better integrators too.
Yeah.
I think it's good that we're learning how to, not that we're going to have all the answers by the time we finish this class, but at least we'll be able to discuss it a little bit more, not only with our kids, who are going to have some of these same questions, and, but people that we may be out in the workplace, that we may run across that may say, well, this is what I believe and why.
And there's another video that I came across, about an hour-long video, and it's by a professor, I forgot, Jason Lyle or something like that. He does an hour-long talk on when somebody comes to you and says, I don't believe in God and you can't convince me. He's like, well, here are and it's really philosophical proofs and logical proofs, and it might be a good thing to incorporate at some point.
I think it's because, we've never been taught to think outside of the box, and like you said, to think that it could be integrated. It's always been this way or that way.
Yep.
I think it comes down to our education system, and it's been corrupted.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we see a little bit of a tinge that they're very, they absolutely keep God out of it. We talked about that last week. But we used to be able to at least pray in school. Now we can't even do that. But even from the get-go, it was never, well, there's this side and that side. It was just like, there's this side. This is it. And they never approached, there's a theory that God could possibly have done, started this. No, evolution.
And they teach it as fact. They don't teach it as theory, and it is theory.
Right. So I think that's where all this starts from.
But I think Christians are I don't know that I want to say it as bad, but they're real willing to camp very firmly on this, but the rest of this doesn't exist.
Right.
The rest of this we don't believe in. The rest of this we don't.
Right.
And I have a hard time believing, I did engineering too, and the science makes sense to me. If the math works out and it works out 100% of the time, it really starts to become hard to argue with. And you can approach it from that way. There's no point where it says God doesn't exist, but it's hard to not believe the scientific stuff, to a certain extent.
Right.
Can you not believe in math? That 2 + 2 is 4? No, I don't believe it. You can't.
Every time you hold
there's
up
only
these
so much you
fingers,
cannot
you come up with
believe.
4.
Yeah, it's every time. Every time. So.
No, I agree. I'm glad you mentioned that, and that's why I have such a, regardless of where you are, and I truly, if you feel at any point I'm trying to convince you one way or the other, tell me and I'll be quiet. You can ding a bell too. We'll put one. But I really feel like this is something that, since it's looking like we're probably not going to get the education system to teach both sides, I think churches really need to teach both sides, just so we're aware, just so that we know the full gamut, and we're very well educated as Christians, and can be open-minded and can look at it so that when our kids, and I'm big, I have kids, so I'm big about that, but when our kids come home with questions and ideas and thoughts, that we don't just camp out in this one little, and then close our eyes and say,
Oh,
oh,
no,
no,
this is the way
no.
it was.
Right.
And I think
And if we're
that helps.
teaching our
Makes a
kids
difference.
this, what's gonna happen
Yeah.
when they go to school and say, well, but what about this?
Mhm.
Yeah.
It
They'll have to
does-
fight those
it-
battles. They'll have
Well,
to fight
but
them.
that's not even the point. When they go in, they don't have to give them 20 minutes worth of time to talk about it.
Right.
But they planted the seed within, everyone
a couple
within the
other
class.
kids.
Right.
within
And then
the classroom.
those kids go home to their parents
Right, right. Well,
and start asking those big questions.
absolutely. And I think a lot of teachers, and I say this as a science teacher who's known tons of science teachers, there's a lot of Christian science teachers who are really well-intentioned, and I was kind of less scared of losing my job, but a lot of them are just scared of losing their job. But if a kid will bring it up and say, what if, that's totally within their realm, and they will gladly give them the floor to talk about those different ideas. And so you're right. When we teach our next generation and they're a little bit more educated on both sides of the picture, then they can it's evangelism almost, really, in my opinion. So
Yeah. And that God is Dead movie might be another.
that's a neat one. That's a neat one.
Because that goes along those same lines.
We may
The
start.
kid has to prove it.
That's
The
true.
kid has to prove it.
We may start showing. We've got all these neat little video clips that we want to show. So we may start as y'all come in. We may have one going and just start about 10:05 and just like a little 5 or 10 minute. If y'all have ideas, give them to us. And if you come in, don't worry, you're not late. Come in, get your food, talk, visit, do whatever. But we may have some of that up there just so that we kind of see, 5 minutes here or there.
So this class is gonna last like a year?
We have enough material that truly we could go on for years and years. I mean,
Right
Instant
now,
Brewer.
right now we have 16 lessons prepared.
Ready.
So that's 4 months.
But
worth.
Instant
Right away.
Brewer probably has, he has like 80 something on his website, and he's continually adding. And so truly, it could go indefinitely.
Good.
Don't let that scare you off.
No, when we get to lesson 80, then we're going to send you guys off to all the other churches in Lubbock. And then
Right,
we'll start
we're
your
going to
class.
start new classes.
All right. Well, I think we've discussed pretty good lesson one. Let's
Okay.
go ahead and shoot into lesson 2 here. So Jesus rules the universe. So it talks about some. Well, it's going to start talking about some horoscopes and those kind of. That's the majority of what this class is about, and historically what people used to believe in. And he starts off by saying that we know. We're learning more, so we know a lot. We're a lot less clueless than we used to be. So back in the old times, in the Colossians, they thought the stars. They had ideas of what to do with the stars. They said that they had this thing called the element, which was the forces and how things happened. And they would use the stars in terms of astrology and horoscopes and stuff like that to try to say, well, that's I'm going to be able to predict this and have better luck with that. Some of the Jews mixed their calendar with the pagan astrology and made horoscopes, and they decorated the synagogues, which is ironic to think about. That synagogue is actually decorated with horoscopes and signs
I
of the
saw
zodiac.
one.
Yeah,
I saw one in,
that's
in
incredible for me to
Israel
think about that.
that there was a big zodiac mosaic on the floor
Yeah,
of the synagogue.
yeah. Because nowadays we would think that's all demonic and stuff like that. Yeah, so they felt they could predict their lives through the horoscopes. And how many of you know your astrological sign? So there's still a historical basis for this stuff. It still exists. Although I can't say that I let much of my life be guided that way. But
You can read that,
yeah,
and then you can go out and make it happen.
exactly. So that's
So-
my theory. Is you see, oh, I'm going to have great success. Well, that builds your confidence, and all of a sudden you make your own success. You're confident. You make your own success. Or if you say, oh, this is a bad day, then you're going to be like, oh, I'm not even going to go to work. And then, yeah, it was a really bad day because you didn't show up to work. Then you got fired.
And then you got fired. You were really bad day.
So, yeah. Let's see. So, so in India, they take it very seriously. They say they would never think of arranging a wedding or a big business deal without getting a detailed list. So they go to their astrologer and they figure out, okay, these are good days, these are bad days. So you definitely want to put your meetings on these good days and just stay home those bad days or whatever. And even a politician in those times would cancel meetings and make kind of life-changing decisions based on the advice from the astrologer. So here's some of the horoscopes here that we were talking about. Are they useful? Do they give any insight into your life? Does anybody watch those and guide yourself by those? It's
I don't, but my question is, aren't we limiting our, you're saying expand our knowledge, not just to
Right.
Christianity?
right.
You're kind of
Are
expanding
we
it.
are we doing
What
it
if-
right now?
What if
Are we
something
coming in and
comes
saying-
up there that, yeah.
Are we
that proves that-
being closed-minded right now?
Yeah, that
By
proves
talking
that
about
this
it?
is true and it
Yeah.
does work, because the church believed the earth was flat for centuries.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all of a sudden
Absolutely.
things change.
And I apologize. I don't mean to belittle this, but it was much more. Many more people believed in it back in these times, and they really, compared to now, because I think that it's less people now that
Take the
live by that.
Take the descriptions and rearrange the signs and see how much they still apply.
And they still apply. Well, it's like a fortune cookie. You open your fortune
Yeah,
cookie.
exactly.
You could guide your life by your fortune cookies a little bit too. But
Well, and one thing that Ensign Brewer goes into that I think is interesting, he talks about how the Bible really warns against it, and he gets into some things regarding like demonic forces and things like that, which are, I know, a little bit scary to talk about. But as he goes through, he and as we read along, he looks into how sometimes the things that the Bible warns against, that they can really open the door to those types of demonic interactions and things like that. And he goes into, and when we go through it, he does a much better job explaining than I will. In fact, I'm kind of regretting trying to jump ahead. But
we'll talk about it here in a minute.
Okay, I'll keep my mouth shut.
But what he basically says is this is either just for fun and it means nothing, or it truly is evil and it represents the devil and it is a demonically guided enterprise. And so I think we have to be careful about having our open mind, because the minute we have an open mind, they might say, well, the Bible's not absolutely true, so let's do that, and then, sex before marriage, that's okay, and then all of a sudden, and we're moving to the secular way, and we're not staying where we need to stay, where God told us to
Well, I
stay.
mean, even God says that, once you kick Satan out of your life, if you don't fill that
With something.
with
something
something,
else.
then he'll bring a legion back in and all his buddies, and they'll move in, and you'll be twice as bad off than you were before you got there.
Right.
So I think it's important that there are battles that have to be fought. We can't just say, well, everything's okay. I think that's part of why we are where we are right now. But I think it's important, and that's one of his points here. We'll get to it in a
He
couple
kind of
minutes.
asks if the Bible does speak against it, or if it doesn't, and if it's just kind of a tradition or a mindset that we've got.
Yeah.
And a lot of the, in Old Testament times, there were a lot of magicians that did a lot of crazy things. And by magician, I don't mean, the Las Vegas style magician. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about, they actually used demonic forces to do some pretty crazy things. And I've known a couple of people, and I don't know much about it, so I can't speak very clearly. But I've known a few people who they used to practice, Wicca and things like that, and then they became Christians. And I've asked them before, what made you become a Christian? Like, what was it? Why did you choose Christianity over, any other religion, any other thing that you could have chosen? And they said, well, that was the one force, again, that you were fighting against, I guess. And they had seen some crazy things happen whenever they were doing witchcraft types of things, and the one force that combated that was Christianity, which is interesting. Which again, I'm kind of babbling, and maybe we'll edit that out of the tape. But it's interesting to see.
So he uses an example. He said there's a friend in Cardiff who briefly worked at a local newspaper. Their astrologer went on holiday and somebody else filled in. He didn't know what to do, so he rummaged around the desk and just found some random stuff and published them in the newspaper. And then he got all these letters back from all the people, and he's like, oh no, I've been found out. But everybody was like, oh, thanks for all the good advice and all that kind of stuff. So proving that it might be a little bit random So here's what he says. He says astrology is either for rubbish, for gullible idiots, like just for fun or whatever, or it's something much worse, and that is that it's demonically guided, and that is the work of the devil. So they back in those times they took astrology very seriously, but it was basically for like you said, like a lack of putting something else in their heart. And so they're talking about this being the elements and the fullness of the universe, and that's the terminology they used for talking about these horoscopes.
We have to remember that Satan mimics everything of God, okay, and twists it just slightly.
Yeah.
But God says, and I was trying to find the scripture and I can't. I'm sorry, I'm very bad at addresses. But he says that he placed the sun, the moon, and the stars in the sky to communicate with us as for signs and wonders. So, God's saying, I put those there for you to learn from. But we just have to really study and understand where we're learning from.
And I don't know enough about horoscopes and astrology to know, but in terms of my perspective, I look and I can kind of see the pictures and the shapes, and so why they were named what they were named, and I can kind of see why the dates line up where they line up, because that's when they were in the sky. That's when they're showing up, or that's when they're most prominent. What I don't understand is where does all the other stuff come from? Where does this day is a good day for you, this day is a bad day for you? Where does all this other stuff comes out of nowhere from my standpoint?
Right. And I think, that, like I say, Satan likes to twist it just slightly. Yeah. So there's truth there, but there's also possible. I mean, it's not something that you can say it's not good at all, because God, His Word says that's what His purpose was.
And He created it.
Yeah.
You also have to realize that where the stars were
back then
is different than where they are now.
That's true.
That's true.
Yeah.
The verse that we were referring to, it's Colossians 2:8-10, and we kind of debate. Y'all have everything that we have. We print it off, so y'all have the stuff, and we don't want to just read to you because that's kind of boring. But at the same time, we want to be on the same page, so y'all can kind of give us input. You'd rather us all read through it together first and then talk about it, because I know it's hard to do stuff on your own, or if you'd rather us kind of summarize, which can not make as much sense. Are we close on time as you looking at your watch? Oh, you got to go. Okay. All right. What time is it, by the way?
11:04.
11:04. Oh, we're good. Well, we should probably be going, shouldn't we?
should be.
Okay.
Right.
The next lesson isn't about astrology, by the way. It's just the intro to it. The next lesson is actually about how much we know of the universe compared to the 85% that we don't know. So we kind of jump in the middle and backtrack and a little bit back and forth. But does anybody want to pray real quick, and then we'll pick up next week where we left off? Anybody? Or I can pray real fast. Okay, fine. Lord, we thank you for this day. I just pray that you would help all of this to sink into our hearts. I pray that you would guard our words, and as we're up here, help everybody to know that we're just, I guess, trying to learn right along with them and to grow right along with them, and that this would be an effort where we really do glorify you as we learn. And we pray this in Jesus' holy name. Amen.